I'd like to welcome you back to the show. Our healthcare expert who comes on the show on a regular basis, and we're very grateful for that, is Paul Seegert. He's managing partner at PCS Advisors. And I need to speak to both employers and employees at this moment in time. Employers, if you want a different approach to managing your second largest expense, you should call Paul Seegert or email him. And employees, if you want a better deal you should have on your health care in terms of what is covered and all the rest, you should ask your employer to contact Paul Seegert, because what they do is help businesses manage their second largest expense by looking at it in an entirely different way. They architect healthcare solutions that actually generate a return on investment for the employer while better serving the workforce. Paul, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. How are you today?
I'm good. Merry Christmas to you and a Happy New Year. We're glad that we met you this last year and you've come on so many times. We're very grateful.
I've been enjoying it as much as you have, and I'm excited to share again with your audience today.
Good. So one of the big things out there is there's a couple of moving targets, so to speak. And one of the biggest moving targets that's kind of on again, off again, is Joe Biden figured he could bypass Congress and even bypass the normal promulgation of executive orders and blah, 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 and push people towards a vaccine mandate by using OSHA. And an emergency type proclamation from OSHA to target companies with 100 or more employees to force them to either get vaccinated and or wear face masks and undergo weekly testing, because not everybody lives in California. And the courts are going in and out on this decision. Could you share what's going on with this?
Yeah, it went in, and then the Fifth Circuit said they put a stay in place, and the real test that I think this has to hold up to, there's multiple, but one is, can you prove that there's grave danger, and does it really represent a response to grave danger that you're doing this a year and a half into a pandemic or 2 years into a pandemic? And so they put a stay in, and then it was elevated to the Sixth Circuit just because they consolidate these kind of things so that all of the cases will go to one place, basically. And I have to say, surprisingly, the Sixth Circuit reversed that, and now it's back on. And it's been a roller coaster for employers who, ironically, the history that I've seen, talking to employers, about 40 a week that would be affected by this. And then reading the different polls that come out and the studies that come out, you had about 85% of employers that said before the presidential announcement of an OSHA mandate, about 85% of employers said, we're going to put some sort of policy in around this issue by the end of 2021, whether that's a vaccine mandate or a surcharge on health insurance premium, and you have to wear PPE or do different things. They were going to have some sort of a policy in place, and I think the majority of those were going to have some sort of either a vaccine mandate or a surcharge on their health insurance premiums if you chose not to get vaccinated. And then when the OSHA mandate came out, that actually slowed that whole thing down. So it had kind of the opposite of the intended effect, because employers who have had to deal with OSHA and many other regulatory agencies in the running of their business were all of a sudden were not interested in putting in a mandate of their own design, only to find out later that it didn't meet the standard that came out from OSHA, and they had to go back to the drawing board, invest twice, and so on. So it really added confusion and slowed the process. And during that period of time where it was all getting interpreted and the rule came out, the numbers changed quite a bit. It started out that it was going to be 85% that were going to do it voluntarily, And now we're at a place today where I was reading recently, and our own experience supports this as well, that you only have 18% that have a mandate of some form in place today, and only another 7% say they will, no matter what happens. So that would only get us to 25. So they whacked 60 points off of that 85 just based on confusion. I mean, the business world does not like confusion. And then you have another 32% that say, we will do it only if this OSHA order stands. And I think there's a pretty broad, it was more broad until very recently here, because this is, as you pointed out, changing by the day. But there was pretty broad consensus that this likely will not hold up in court. 6 of the 9 times of the last 9 times that OSHA has used this emergency standard authority to do something even far less significant than this, they didn't hold up in court, either partially or entirely. So I think the expectation on part of the business community is that it likely won't stand, and this is just now delaying it and or pushing it forward to the Supreme Court, where it was probably going to get in any case.
Well, of course, the thing that bothers me about this is, number one, is this the role of the federal government? And that's one of the constitutional issues. Some states are saying you can't have a vax mandate. Some states are saying you don't need to wear a mask. And then, of course, they never want to acknowledge people that have already had COVID. They don't want to acknowledge that the people that have had vaccinations can have breakthrough. They don't want to acknowledge the people that have vaccinations can still spread the virus. And so what they're really doing, and we know what they're doing, they're trying to leverage power, control, and costs to employers and employees to force everybody to get the vaccine, to get them off their back.
Yeah, I think a lot of the policies that we've seen where you have to do this multiple times a week testing or even weekly testing or wear PPE, it may allow in some cases for an employer to say they're not doing a mandate, but they really are through inconvenience and cost.
Yes.
You think about the cost of testing as an example. I was a little bit surprised. I expected the OSHA standard would require employers to pay for the testing. They're coming out now saying, the administration has said they're going to have insurance companies cover it, as if that means it won't eventually hit the pocketbooks of the employer and the people who work there. Of course, it will in terms of increased premium. But in the interim, who's going to pay for these tests? The employer's not required to. That's its own whole discussion, I think, because we've got this hiring environment that's tougher than has been in 15 years. So some employers are going to cover it if this thing does continue on. Some won't. That'll be added to the list of decisions or qualifying issues a potential employee looks at when they're going to go to work somewhere. Because when you think about the cost, it's anywhere, depending on the quality of the test, $25 to $125 to do it weekly, each week. And even at the $25 mark, you're adding $100 a month to someone's budget. That's enough where they will think about it. And on the higher mark, if that employer chooses to require the higher end test, then you're literally adding $500 a month to someone's budget. That's not a small expense.
So I've got a question for you on that, but we're going to wait till the next segment. Folks, our guest is Paul Seegert with PCS Advisors. They're on the web at pcsadvisors.com. Again, employers, if you want to cut your cost and improve the benefit plans for your employees, email Paul at pcsadvisors.com. You're listening to the Andy Caldwell Show. Stay tuned. I'd like to welcome you back to the show. Our guest is Paul Seegert, managing partner of PCS Advisors. And again, what they do is they help companies with a different approach that results in drastic savings and improvements to your second largest cost. That's healthcare, and it improves the healthcare plan for your employees at PCS Advisors. Paul and I are talking about Joe Biden's plan. It's subterfuge, really. He's trying to say that OSHA has a right to manage COVID in the workplace because COVID presents a grave danger. And they're using an expedited emergency type pathway for OSHA to get this approval without Congress review and a bunch of other things. And as Paul said, what they're doing is they're imposing inconvenience and costs, and that's, folks, is to force vaccination. So before the break, we were talking about, well, who pays? If let's say the person doesn't want the vaccination and they have to go weekly testing, Paul said that could cost anywhere from $25 to $100 per employee. So my question, and we've talked about this before, there's a thing called HIPAA. People have some sort of a right, and you mentioned that employers can get involved in this, but they have some sort of a right to medical privacy. So let's say you have this company and you want to have 100% vax because you don't want to deal with this. Could you hire or fire based on vaccination status?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and you have the employment law attorneys are getting a little bit busy around this topic right now because the way that you do it can open you up to liability. And so based on the OSHA mandate, no, they have to be given the opportunity to not get vaccinated but submit to testing. And I think there are employers out there that are doing that in practice, but they're not necessarily making it an official policy. So that right there is part of the whole problem, and part of what employers are now stuck with is navigating new liabilities, and they already have, that's already a long list.
So one of our guests this week told us that buried in one of Biden's, probably his Build Back Better plan was the ability to increase OSHA violations to $700,000. And a lot of them see that this was a forerunner to getting this OSHA thing through, that every employer would realize, wow, if I'm not testing these people and I don't require them to be vaccinated and or I'm not requiring them to be masked, some snitch could cost me $700,000 per violation.
Well, that could happen. And I think another interesting part of this is the fact that you have really a couple thousand employees at OSHA that are supposed to oversee this implementation of this at many millions of workplaces. It's not really feasible, not practical. So then it would rely on whistleblowers. And to me, that's just a crazy path to go down. It's amazing that we're having this conversation today, that we're going to go down a path where we're going to rely on whistleblowers in an area like this. It's pretty wild. There is, kind of to that prior point, your question that you're asking, the employers, there's the most case law, the most precedent that we have so far in case law related to this says employers have the right to require a vaccine. And yet, yet we talked about the fact that only 18% are and only another 7% will. And that's because 1 out of 3 are very concerned that they will not be able to staff their facility if they were to do that. So then you have this OSHA mandate, you have the other federal mandates for healthcare workers, which have been blocked in the courts, and so on, because they're trying to force these employers to do something that the employers have real hesitation to do, because they actually have to run this business. And we're still at a point where 30% of our healthcare workers don't have the vaccine in this country. And when the courts shot down the healthcare worker mandate that was coming down federally, you have some very highly respected world-class institutions like the Cleveland Clinic that said we are not doing a mandate because it is more important that we can actually staff this hospital and provide care than worry about whether this nurse, who probably has natural immunity anyway, gets the vaccine. I mean,
it's going to be really interesting. You know, they are upping the pressure, but you have cops, firefighters, nurses, teachers, all sorts of professions that we rely on every day to show up. Not to mention, like we said, the private sector, who's already struggling to keep a workforce. You know, and then the other question in terms of liability, we know that the manufacturers of the vaccines are shielded from liability. But what about the employer? If the employer says you have to get a vaccine, and then the person is vaccine injured and or dies, as rare as that is, it does happen. Could the employer be sued because they went out on their own and required the vaccination?
Well, you can sue for anything, and that's the problem. There's going to be added cost to the system. That's part of the problem. There's going to be added cost to the system. And I'm not an attorney, but we have lots of clients who have concern, and therefore they are very carefully navigating this with the help of an employment law attorney, because they're not held harmless in the same way as the pharmaceutical industry is.
You know, there was a gal here in Arroyo Grande who was a teacher, and she got it. She took the vaccine. Her whole family took it. They were all fine. She took it. She died. Got immediately sick, got really ill, never recovered. And, you know, the other thing, of course, what we know is they're not reporting these things accurately in terms of the numbers of vaccine injuries and or deaths in terms of...
They never have.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, is prior to COVID and prior to how politicized this whole conversation has become, it was generally accepted by people of all different political leanings that VAERS only captured about 10% of what happens. And if you think about the fact that if you go look in VAERS, 1 in 60,000 people, I mean, there's some pretty alarming statistics in there. And if that's only 10%, then, boy, that could be cause for great concern.
Well, absolutely. And folks, again, it could be hundreds of thousands of people that have either gotten sick, injured, or died. Sometimes the sickness is short-lived. Sometimes they die really quickly. And then there's other ones where there's other, you know, very esteemed doctors and research scientists are saying some of these things are going to take a while to manifest, but they will manifest because you're just messing with your DNA and your RNA in some way, shape, or form via these shots. Now, there's another thing that they're not talking about. So one of the doctors I really, truly trust on this show, she did not like the vaccines, but she likes the pill that just came out. And that's another question. If you have a therapeutic that the government has approved that's available, then why still force the mandate on the vaccine?
Well, if you're me and you've been in the healthcare business for a while, industry for a while, then you're jaded and you say just follow the money trail, because it is a massive business. And amongst our peer countries, I see reporting, and I follow this whole topic really closely and all healthcare topics. But I read in the last week or two that they said, people in Austria and people in Germany and these various countries that are unvaccinated are not going to be allowed in public places, are not going to be allowed to do this and not going to be allowed to do that. And when you read down into the article, our reporting buries it pretty deep in the article that they either have to show that they've been vaccinated or have antibodies, have recovered from COVID. So most of our peer countries do recognize that as a real thing. And we have some of our leading public health experts have advocated for that. And now but they're not out on the news talking every day because it's become so political. Their biggest complaint is they can't really have a scientific conversation around this topic. I encourage everyone to go read the Great Barrington Declaration.
Yeah. Yep.
But they don't. They don't know about it. It's not in the news. And
all right, Paul, we're out of time. Merry
money.
Christmas to you. Looking forward to having you on in the new year. Thank you for being with us.
Same to you.
All right, Paul Seegert, PCSadvisors.com, PCSadvisors.com. We'll be back. Stay tuned.